الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic OASIS Live. Dear brothers, the topic today is a topic that, subhanAllah, that every single one of us will be interested in. Every human being, to be honest, that is willing to think, that uses the mind. This is a topic for them. This is a discussion for them. And the emphasis that the Quran puts on us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts on thinking itself. Many ayat, Allah Azza wa Jal talks about this in Surah Al-Mulk, Surah Al-Baqarah, across the whole Quran, constantly asking, why is it that you don't think? Why is it that you don't reflect? Why is it that you look the other way? And when you know that the haqq is in front of you, or the truth is being described to you, you look the other way. Why is it that you don't think in the Quran? فلا يتدبرون القرآن أم على قلوب أقفالها صم بكم عمي فهم لا يرجعون, and many more. In Surah Al-Mulk, saying it, wasn't there a warner that came to you? They said bala, ولكن, but it came to them, but what did they do? They did not listen, and they did not think. ما كنا في أصحاب السعير, and at the end they ended up in Jahannam. And so not thinking and not reflecting is one of the reasons for why the people end up in Jahannam. So inshallah, the topic today is around this discussion, and we have our brother Sharif here, and we are going to discuss not only thinking, but also how the youth or the children are growing up in the environments, whether they're schools, universities. Are they being taught to think, or are we just producing products? And for that, inshallah, we have our brother Sheikh. Welcome to Islamic Oasis.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And
Sheikh,
Jazakallah khair for inviting me.
Of course, Sheikh. I mean, we have to bring thinkers to the show, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless you and raise your status in dunya and the akhirah, Sheikh. Sheikh, let's start with this discussion here. If you can, I mean, what is thinking and why is it so important?
So one famous Muslim scholar of the recent past, Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani, he discusses or he defines a thinking process, and he succinctly points out that the thinking process is 4 components in essence. So if you're going to produce an idea in your head, you're going to have 4 components. Now, why is this important? Yeah, generally what I find is, when a person's, research or being this critical thinker, let's talk about that. Yeah, when he's been a critical thinker, there are 3 components. There's the process, there's the identification of the problem, and then there's the knowledge set. These are 3 different issues regards to it. Yeah. So, I've given, I taught different people over the years. Yeah. And one thing that I try to do is I try to leave something that they can ask a question upon. Yeah, so I'll leave a gap in an explanation. The reason why I'm leaving a gap in an explanation is because what I want to do is I want to see if they're listening and understanding, because if they are, they'll understand that there's a gap and they'll ask a question about it. Yeah, so it's like just a little technique. And what I always find is that the clever people, the most intellectual people, are not the people who have the most knowledge. It's the people who can ask the right questions. Yeah, it's always the case. Yeah, because if you can formulate your question, you understand what you're trying to solve as a problem. So let's talk about these 3 things. So you got the process of thinking, then you've got the question, and then you've obviously got the knowledge set that you're trying to look at. Yeah. So when we talk about the process, which I think you were touching upon here, which is that, and this is where I was mentioning about Shaykh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani, where he talks about 4 components of thought. So he's talking about the process of thinking. So he says that you need to have reality, you need to have senses, you need to have a brain, and you need to have previous information. So what does this practically mean? Well, the brain, he's saying here, is the store of the previous information, the ability to link reality to previous information. The senses is that which senses the reality external to the human being. Yeah. So those 2 things are like the physical components, if you want. The 2 variable components are going to be your reality and your previous information. So let's look at this. So what does he mean by reality here? So he says that if you don't have a reality for a thing, you cannot conceptualize that thing. Yeah. And he gives there's examples that you can give. For example, I always give the example of if you had a person who was blind from birth and he never experienced the color red. Yeah. So for example, behind you is the logo and it's got red, and you're trying to say to that person that there's a logo and the letters and the red. He will not be able to comprehend what you mean by red because he's never experienced red. Yeah. So you have to have reality for it in order for you to say, okay, identification of red. Same thing when you're teaching a child language. It's like you point to realities. Yeah, so you point to different colors. Oh, that's a green color, green, and you kept pointing to it. And this is a car, and you point to a car. So you're giving information. Yeah, so you're giving reality, and then what you're then doing is you're then using that information and storing it as previous information now. Yeah, so you have previously installed ideas, whether that's been learned from the environment, learned from other people, or other areas where previous information comes from. And so then the thing that you do is you take reality and you link it to previous information. I'll give an example of this. So we understand reality is really important, like the color red. Blind man cannot comprehend it. Why is previous information really important? I also give this as an example a lot, which is to do with the hieroglyphs.
So, Sheikh, are you saying the blind people can't think?
No, they can think, but they cannot think. They cannot think about the color red.
So
you know, I watched this video once about a blind person, and he was explaining what his experiences are like. Yeah, so it's called qualia, but his experiences, and he was explaining. He goes, I cannot fathom. This is what he says. I cannot fathom that a person can call in a busy area across a room, yeah, with lots of people, and he's able to see that person and locate him straight away. He goes, He goes, that's just. He goes, to him, that's like mind-boggling. I can't understand that
because he's blind.
He's blind. He's been blind from birth, so he's not had that experience. Yeah. So the way he has to do it, he has to try to filter different sounds. So his way of thinking and comprehending that, reality when somebody's calling somebody out or calling him is in a very different way. Yeah.
So let me ask you.
So they have a thinking process, but they cannot think about the color red here.
So if you have a scholar that is blind, which we had,
yeah,
some of them were both blind in head and actually blind. But I'm saying that, how do we accept the judgment of a person who's blind?
No, you can do, because obviously if it depends, isn't it? If the judgment is upon something that requires seeing, then yeah, you can't. But if it's just judgment based on information that's transmitted to him, and he can make a judgment upon that, so long as the transmission of the information given to him was accurate, then that's fine. So it's like, for example, a scholar who wants to make ijtihad in genetic cloning, but he's not aware of genetic cloning. He goes to experts, and the experts will explain to him what's going on. Yeah, and then based upon the information the experts have given to him, he'll then make a judgment. So he can do that. Yeah, but if it requires physical seeing to make a judgment, yeah, and I can't think of anything specific that would require physical seeing to make a judgment upon. But if it requires that, then yeah, he wouldn't be able to make a judgment upon it. Obviously, there's questions whether what he's making a judgment upon is the information being accurately conveyed to him, or is something else being conveyed to him? Yeah, for whatever reasons. Yeah. So yeah, so there's questions regards to that. But like I was saying, just on the issue, so we've got reality, then we've got something called previous information. I always give the example of hieroglyphs. For centuries, hieroglyphics, the Egyptian written language, was unknown to human beings, simply because it became a dead language. And people tried to study it. So like in the West, they tried to study what the hieroglyphs actually meant, yeah? And so there's lots of proposals. But in reality, they didn't know what it meant, yeah? They just thought that they could study it, study the structural patterns, all of these things, and come to a conclusion. In reality, they couldn't, yeah? It was only when they discovered something called the Rosetta Stone. So the Rosetta Stone was a stone tablet where it had ancient Greek, it had another language, and it had hieroglyphs. And basically, it was a translation. The Greek was a translation of the hieroglyphs. So as a result, they were now saying, okay, we know ancient Greek. It's not a dead language. So what we can use is we can use the previous information of ancient Greek to then correlate between the words and the sentences with this. So the point here is this: is that you have to have previous information. In this situation, it was ancient Greek, to be able then to say, okay, this hieroglyphic symbol represents this Greek word, and this Greek word means this. Yeah, and then as a result, they were able to build up the meanings of the hieroglyphs using the Rosetta Stone, and then expanding that information. So you need that previous information. You need that. So you need the previous information and you need the reality. So now we understand the process. So if I'm going to make a judgment, am I going to make a judgment by just looking at a small part of the reality? Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm going to try to get as many data points of the reality as possible. The previous information that I hold, those concepts, those ideas, that information that I hold, is it shallow or is it comprehensive? Do I need to increase that knowledge set in order to make that judgment? So, for example, let's take an example. Let's say somebody wanted to, let's say somebody wanted to look at whether something is halal or haram to drink. Yeah, and he looks at it and he sees it's a clear liquid, and he goes, well, there's no prohibitions within the Quran and the Sunnah about clear liquid being drunk. Yeah, then he says it's halal, but then you say to him, yeah, but that's an intoxicant. Yeah, and so then he looks at it and he studies it and he realizes that his information that he had in terms of the reality that he was observing was incomplete. Now he can make a better judgment regards to it. Let's say that all he has is the previous information that he has about the Quran and the Sunnah is the text that says that doesn't include the prohibition of drinking alcohol. Because as we know, the Quran came down in stages and the prohibition came down in stages. So he doesn't know about this. So then he said, yeah, it's halal. He now knows the complete reality, yeah, that it's alcohol, but he doesn't have the complete previous information, yeah. So the judgment that he's making is not a correct judgment again, yeah. So that's the first thing, is to understand the process. You need to understand the reality as comprehensible as possible, and you need to have the informational previous knowledge which forms tools by which you can interpret that reality in the correct possible way as best as possible. So that's the first process. The second process would be to formulate your question, yeah. And so what do we mean by formulate the question? The question is saying, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Because if I can because what reality am I meant to study? Am I meant to study the whole of reality? No. So what is the particular question that I'm trying to solve, so I can narrow the information that I need? Yeah. If I can narrow the information, so for example, the question here is the liquid is this liquid halal or haram? Yeah, that's the question. And that's why when I look at in terms of people who are quite intelligent, it's because they know the question to ask. They identify the problem that is requiring to be solved, or the issue that requires an opinion upon. Yeah, that's why they're quick at that, because information and having knowledge, lots of people can have information and knowledge, but the quickness of being identify where the problem is, not that many people can do that. Yeah, so this is the other issue, is that in terms of being able to identify the question. And then the third area, which is obviously now, okay, I know my process. I need to study reality. I need to have the correct background information to link to that reality and make a judgment. I know what the problem is, so I'm trying to solve a particular issue. So I've now narrowed down where I need to study. And now as a result, I can now go and do the research, whether that's to study the knowledge or the information of the reality, and also the particular relevant background previous information that I need in order to make a judgment upon that reality. And then I can build upon that. So those are like the three general components, I would say, that if a person is aware, he can start to help build a critical way of thinking this process. There's another fourth aspect to it, but I don't want to go on.
So here's the thing. You said
understood that. Yeah.
Sure. Formulating the question is important, as you said, right? I mean, because this is, I guess that's the ability to be able to connect the dots so that you can ask the right question. Now, and then we are talking about critical thinking here, and we're talking about thinking in general. Sheikh, the growth, let's say in schools, high schools, universities, whatever, when we're talking about the kind of questions that the youth are asking, or this growth of atheism and agnostics, all of this nonsense that's happening, is it that the youth have not been able to they have not been given the ability to formulate the right question, meaning they have not been, because they're denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then this is being made into, oh, that's smart. You are intelligent because you're questioning everything. And then supposedly those atheists and these agnostics are the ones who are smart, and they're the ones who are, you see how they're portrayed. So I guess the question is, are we not giving our children the proper method to think so that they can formulate the right question? Or where does that come from, Akhi? Or is that that ability is built, or is that ability comes naturally? What is it?
Okay, so I think there's a few other things, isn't there? So what tends to happen is a lot of people, if you ask a person, are you a thinker or you're a follower, everybody's going to say that I'm a thinker. Nobody's going to say, no, I just follow, yeah? Whether they are atheist, Christian, or Muslim, or whatever. They're going to say that. The issue is, the difference is between people who are critical thinkers is a few other things. So we talked about, process of thinking. We talked about the identification of the question. We talked about the knowledge set that you require. But there are also other things that we need to look at as well. One of them is to do with your background assumptions. Are we aware of the biases that we hold? That's really fundamental, yeah? Because most people aren't aware of the biases that they hold. There's a lot of people out there who I've discussed with, atheists and others, who think that they're the most intelligent people on the planet, and then are just so blinded by the biases and the assumptions that they have, yeah? They cannot see it. They cannot see that they have these biases. They think they are critical. They are looking for evidence. It's all of these types of things, but they're just unaware of the particular biases that they hold on to. And what you find is that we want to all be seen as critical thinkers. We're then told in this society to be a critical thinker means to be this, yeah, liberal, secular mindset. And so therefore we think, okay, these religious people, these Muslims, these Islam, to hold on to it is to be away from this liberal secular mindset, which is to be away from critical thinking. Yeah. So I will criticize the people who follow Islam or Muslims, etc., these Maulvis, whatever it is, and say they're uncritical, they're blind, they're just emotional, they're just dogmatic. Whereas if you aren't that thing, then you are liberal secular in your outlook and your thinking, etc. But they've not reflected upon their own biases. Yeah. This is the issue. And because they haven't reflected upon their own biases, they are unaware that they have certain assumptions which they've not challenged for themselves. Yeah. So they need to challenge. So that's the other thing, is that, okay, the fourth thing is to be aware of your biases and to be aware of how you challenge your own biases in order to say, okay, the biases that I hold on to, are they rational or not? Yeah.
So is that previous information for them?
It's part of previous information, but obviously what happens, a lot of the previous information that we develop is built by the environment. Yeah. These are, we call, sometimes it's called received opinion. People say received opinion, which they mean basically is it's the dominant opinion such that you don't question it and you just assume it to be true. Yeah. It's the received opinion. Yeah. As an example, recently I had a discussion on another podcast with it wasn't like a long discussion. It was like a phone in, people can call in, and he was an ex-Muslim Murtad from Saudi. I think he was living in Saudi as well, possibly. And I said to him, what's your best argument against Islam? What's the real argument that you have against Islam? And he brought up the had upon the Murtad. Yeah. And I was like, is that your best argument? Yeah. And then he goes, yeah, look at the liberal secular West. They allow people to have free thought and free thinking. And I said, do they? Yeah. And so then I gave him examples. And I said, look, for you to make a judgment, because this is the point, he's making a judgment saying that Islam is false because of a particular law which contradicts a particular moral value. For you to make that judgment, you have to look at your assumptions you're making. So the first assumption you're making is that there's something like what we call objective moral values or moral realism, that there are true moral propositions, yeah, independent of me and you, whether humans existed or not, yeah, because he's an atheist as well, so whether irrespective of whether God exists or not, there are true moral propositions that exist somewhere, yeah, where they exist, who grounds them, all that type of thing, separate discussion, but there are true things like this. So I said, do you believe that? Yeah, and he goes, I don't know. So you're making a judgment against Islam on a belief that you cannot justify. Yeah. So this basically saying Islam says this, it's immoral, and therefore Islam cannot be right because it contradicts this moral objective value. Yeah.
Which they have created in their own mind.
Well, yeah, but that's the point. Point question I'm asking him. Like, look, for example, if we turn around and if somebody says that I believe in a particular religion, you say, what does the religion say? The religion says that squared circles exist or married bachelors exist. I say, well, that's false. That's a false religion. How can a religion call to a completely contradictory set of ideas? Yeah, there's a set of objective facts. Yeah. And objective ideas, and yours is contradicting it. Or, for example, let's say religion turns around and it says that human beings don't exist. Yeah, some absurd claim, and we say, well, that's obviously wrong. That's objectively wrong. Human beings exist. I exist. I'm a human being. Therefore, we exist. Yeah. So you'd say that, okay, there's a statement that contradicts an objective fact, or the statement is a logical contradiction. That statement that does those two things, contradicts an objective fact, is false. So if I'm going to say the Quran and the Sunnah is false, is not a revelation, a'udhu billah, then I'm saying the reason why is because it contradicts this moral value, then is the moral value an objective fact? Yeah, that can be proven external to any agent, any mind. Yeah, does it exist independent of any mind, I should say, yeah, any person that exists, yeah. If they say I don't know, then on what basis are you judging Islam to be false? Because it's not objective now, is it? Yeah, it's not a realist position, yeah. So in that situation, he's making a judgment without understanding his own underlying assumptions, yeah. This is the issue, to understand his own underlying assumption. His underlying assumptions is that the morals in the West are objectively true, and therefore if Islam does not fit within the Western liberal set of values, then Islam must be false. That's the assumption, yeah? Now that's difficult sometimes for people to be aware of their biases and assumptions. We all have it. I have it. Other people have it. So, but it's being aware of it and being aware that those background informations and ideas that we hold, can we justify them? Yeah, are they sufficiently justifiable? And are we aware of them, and can we justify them? And most people are unaware of them, but at the same time want to be called critical thinkers. Yeah, you can't be a critical thinker if you're not aware of your own assumptions and biases. So that's a fourth aspect.
To be called critical thinker, so these are the conditions that you might.
Yeah.
But Sheikh, someone has to point it out, or is that something learned? I mean, I guess I'm asking. I mean, this is also, is that learned, Sheikh? First of all, that you have these biases, number one, or you should be. But somebody can say, Sheikh, that look, okay, I mean, if we just did not have this conversation, we probably be. For instance, if somebody says, okay, well, you're telling me the Quran is correct, can't that be biased also? Your own bias.
So there's a few things. So you're right. Sometimes you have to learn these things, learn about your own biases. And this goes.
I'm asking that question for the sake of.
No, I know. But I think this is the fifth area. This is what the fifth condition does in terms of making you become a critical thinker, or helping you to be justified in your beliefs, is to be aware of the opposing argument. Yeah. So if you're aware of the arguments against your position, and then you're able to identify your own biases, then you identify your assumptions, then you have to try to justify your assumptions. And then if you make your judgment, even though it goes against the other person's position, or an opposing position to your position, then you can say you have a justified belief system, yeah? Or not, I don't want to say people who don't do this are not justified. I'm just saying in terms of you're somebody who've
A
gone through
scholar.
a very, a critical
A
process,
critical
yeah?
thinker. I don't want to say scholars because not
Yeah.
all scholars are critical thinkers, but I'm.
Yeah. So he's gone through a strong, robust, critical point. So what is he doing? So what I try to do is, if I'm coming across an argument or a discussion, or I'm talking to somebody, I want to be in a position where I know his argument better than he knows his own argument. Yeah. So I know I could argue his position better than him. If I can do that and still disagree with him and criticize his position, then I know I'm criticizing the very strongest position of his argument. I'm not criticizing a weak position of his argument. Yeah. So like I said, I've been on a few podcasts where, non-Muslims are invited on to raise their questions and criticisms against Islam. So one of them is called, I don't know if you heard of it, it's called Hamza's Den, the arena. Yeah. So it's like a very combative. A lot of people watch it because I think they find the entertainment value in terms of it. But when a person raises a question, I'll ask them or criticism. I'll ask them to clarify what their criticism is. Yeah, most of the cases they can't clarify what they're actually criticizing. Yeah, why they what is it their argument really is. Yeah. So for example, some people will say, "Oh, I'm criticizing you on, XYZ," and you say, okay, is this an internal critique or an external critique? And then I'll explain to them. An internal critique is to take our beliefs and to show how our beliefs are incoherent. Yeah. So somebody believes, like for example, we would say Trinitarian beliefs in Christianity is incoherent. Incoherent based on what? Internal critique. Yeah, you're saying the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, the Father is not the Son, and the Father is not the Holy Spirit, and the Son is not the Holy Spirit, but yet there's only one of them. Yeah, we'd say that's an internal critique. There's a problem there. Yeah, and that's a whole discussion in itself. Yeah, but I'm just saying that's an internal critique. Yeah, so you take your beliefs and you show a contradiction in your beliefs. External critique is say take your beliefs and say there's a fact or a propositional belief external to your beliefs that it contradicts, and there's justification of why we should take this fact external to your belief to be true and why yours therefore contradicts it and therefore makes it false. So that's an external critique. So yeah, I'll ask them, is this, and they won't know. Yeah, so they're unaware, so they've not really formulated and properly thought through their argument. And then the final thing that tends to happen is that I'll just say to them, look, because I'll get frustrated with them, and I'll say, look, let me make your argument for you. Yeah, it's getting too hard now, trying to tease it out of your mind what your argument really is. Let me just explain, is this what you're trying to say? And then I'll try to help them with it, and I'll try to strengthen their argument with it. And then after doing it, then I'll say, okay, this is the reason why I think it's wrong. Yeah, or this is the reason why it is wrong. Yeah, so those 5 areas. 1, the process. 2, asking the right questions. 3, knowing where to identify the knowledge, the information to fill in, the reality in the previous information, answer that question. 4, to be aware of your biases, and your presuppositions and your assumptions in the question. And the 5th one is to understand the opposing argument to your position, whatever that position is. So if a Shafi'i scholar, mujtahid, is looking at an evidence and he believes this is the best evidence on a particular issue, and then what he will also do, he'll look at, for a mujtahid, he'll be looking at opposing mujtahideen, wouldn't he? Yeah, he wouldn't just be looking at his own from his own madhab. Yeah. So he's looking at theirs and making an assessment in order to say, okay, this is the reason why I follow my opinion and believe that this opinion is stronger than that opinion. Yeah, that's how he becomes a mujtahid. It's not just that he's following the school, but rather he's able to assess the evidences, not just within his school, but cross schools as well. So opposing. So he's going to look at that, and it's through that process and that discussion in our past that jurisprudence flourished, because scholars were debating whose evidences justify what opinion best. Yeah, and therefore it resulted in this, golden period of mujtahideen and usul al-fiqh and different madhahibs to being developed because there's constant debate and discussion and dialogue that was taking place to people who oppose your position, because the whole idea is that we're trying to seek the truth, and so this opposition is not a bad thing. This opposition tests our assumptions and tests our processes to see whether it's robust or not.
So, Sheikh, first of all, how much time do I have with you? I want to make sure, because I know you have another podcast. Half an hour. Okay, Sheikh. So here's the thing. Because, man, subhanAllah, Sheikh, I have so many questions. So, but I think one of the things that the brothers wanted to also get to, man, I want to have this continuous discussion. But okay, so here, as far as transferring this discussion, this type of critical thinking process to mainstream.
Yeah.
Okay, because obviously people, because parents who are now worried that their children are becoming kuffar, murtadeen. Sheikh, let me ask you before I ask the question that I want to ask. Are we going to see Muslim youth become kuffar? Is that going to be a normal thing? And I know you.
Well,
and I'm saying that for a reason. I'm asking you because a kind of United States, I don't know how it is in Britain, right? And but in the US, questioning Allah by youth within the Muslim families, leaving Islam, questioning the Quran, it is really becoming a common thing. And
so obviously, yeah.
Then the parents are dumbfounded in many ways because the parents themselves never did serious study of why they are Muslims themselves. Like the question that you were asking, okay, I got to ask these questions to myself first. Do I have the answers to the questions that I want? If I'm asking somebody else, am I myself grounded in what I'm asking? Do I know? And so the parents are not at all. And then they are Muslims because, well, khalas, my parents were Muslims. They have this emotional attachment to Islam. They did some thinking. It was enough for them to say, okay, yeah, I understand why Islam is correct. But then when children are going to these universities, they let them go. They come back with all of these questions that because they didn't think Islam in that serious way. Now the children are coming home and saying, why do I need to follow this Islam or this deen, this and that? There's so much out there and we're being limited. And now the parents don't know how to answer. So you see where I'm going with this. You see, I mean, what's happening?
The question, so I think the issue is that how do we safeguard children? How do we build them in a correct way?
Thinking people, what is that process? You just explained the process, but how do we transfer that process?
Yeah.
And what are we doing wrong?
So, well, so it's obviously it's a very complicated situation because we're living in an environment. So when we talk about previous information, the environment gives us that previous information. Parents give us that previous information. They form like the background information, and they form the bedrock by which we now look at the world. Sense reality. So what type of environment are we living in whether it's America or Britain or the West generally, is an environment which is saturated with ideas and values and culture and, films and TV and all these types of things, music, that represents a set of values, constantly inculcating, I was speaking to a brother recently and I was explaining how if you've noticed a lot of the cartoons, films, that come out, they tend to focus upon a young person who's trying to break away from the tradition of their parents. Yes. Seems to be like a common theme.
Yeah, they're the superheroes. They're the thinking outside the box.
Yes, that's right. Thinking outside the box. They're breaking the tradition.
Although thinking outside the box, we encourage. But this is not thinking outside the box. There is no box.
Yeah. But it's this idea that the tradition, the past tradition has to be broken. It's backwards. Question. Yeah. Not even questions, broken. That's what's going on here. So I'm just saying is that obviously you and that the parents don't know and you know better, and the way that a person knows better generally in these types of
Right.
cartoony films for kids is it's about freedom and individualism. Yeah. So what's happening is that that type of mindset and what we call aqliya, that mentality is being created from an early age. Yeah. And then it's only being reinforced further in schools. We try to produce this type of, mentality even more that makes them think that there can never be any absolute truths outside of a liberal paradigm. So, for example, when it comes to belief in God, it can never be proven one way or another. Some arguments for, some arguments against. It's so this idea of what they call postmodernism or post-truth, they can never be truths. And so, what you create is you create these types of children and kids and young adults whose background, whose culture, whose previous information that have been built over the years is that of a liberal secular mentality that therefore judges things according to a liberal secular mindset without like that point about being aware of their own biases, because they're not aware of their own biases as well, because they've never actually been asked to critique liberalism. Wherein like in Britain, we have like citizenship studies. Where in citizenship studies would they ever say, is democracy the right method of government? What are the arguments against democracy? Would they ever say that? You'd never have that. In higher end academia universities, you cannot get, scholarships or PhD programs if you're going to critique certain liberal values. You're not going to. Even people on the right, of the secular capitalist ideology, they will say the same thing. Say, oh, liberal arts is all left-leaning. Yeah, it's self-selective. Yeah, so you never get that questioning upon that. And that's the reality of any ideological society, is that it's only going to allow those type of ideas that are going to perpetuate its own existence. Yeah. So in that situation, parents have to be aware, isn't it? They have to be aware of what. So this is, I think the issue here is this, is that what parents need to be aware of is that they need to be aware of the ideas, the received opinions of society that you may not consciously be aware is being inculcated with you and your kids every single day, in different aspects of your life. Once you become aware of that, then you have an opportunity to maybe counter it. Maybe therefore raise questions about, is it right for a person to make their own choices in life? And whatever styles people want to use in terms of with their kids or whatever it is, whatever age groups, those are maybe they'll give examples, but certain programs that gets them to question those received opinions under a liberal secular ideology. So recently I did a video with another brother where I was asking him questions on secularism as a religion. So secularism, by all modern standards and modern academic definitions, would be a religion. So we think religion.
Sheikh, okay, so there's now.
So
how much is fear? Okay, so there's two questions. I'm going to ask it before because of your time. Number one, how much fear? These people who think that in the West there's freedom of thinking and all of that nonsense, but then what role does fear play in a person not being able to think critically? Fear. And then number two, just so you can kind of combine the answers. So that's because the reason I'm saying that is because you said that, look, you have to be able to take them to sit with people who can, let's say, critique democracy. But we don't do that, right? The general institutions, they don't do that because they don't want to put doubts in the minds of the people regarding their own institutions. So then, but you want them to, well, if you're going to be critical thinker, if you're going to say that you are a free society, then you should allow that. So that's a contradiction by itself. But then the Muslims don't do it because they say, look, man, we got to live here, whatever, and I don't want to create these problems. And hence you have no critical thinking taking place, number one. Okay, so
Yeah.
number two, when we talk about the elite universities, Sheikh, do you think that elite universities are different than the average universities that we see? I mean, obviously it's elite and average. I already made the difference. But in the elite universities, are from where the rulers or of the country come are developed? Are they thought thinking and these process of thinking the same way as the general universities? And the reason I'm asking that is so that because how can we have a country that is actually where people can rule and understand and think, and develop their country if there is no critical thinking taking place?
Yeah. Okay. So, so in terms of the first one, in terms of fear, yeah. So, I think the issue is this: is that when it's not necessarily the case that you're looking at a 6-year-old child and trying to critique democracy for them. Yeah. What it is that obviously you want to critique democracy, you want to critique liberal secular values, but it's being aware of certain core ideas that are constantly rammed home to people. You're an individual. You're free to do whatever you want, and you try to do what pleases you. And if you're not doing what pleases you, you're not going to be happy. Yeah, those are the core set of ideas. Democracy develops from that. Capitalism as an economic system develops from that. That no religion should determine how you live your life. All of these things. So it's being aware that you're living in a society that's constantly that reflects that culture. If we lived in an Islamic society, it would reflect our values. That's just normal. Yeah, that's how what we call ideological societies work. They're going to reflect the core fundamental values that create that society. So if you're not aware of this, that this is what's been instilled within children, within adults, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a situation where you're not going to have the ability to think about how to counteract it because you're not even aware of the problem. Yeah, remember that.
So it's not fear. It's not being aware even.
Yeah. So it's that second issue. It's about knowing what question needs to be asked. Yeah, what's the problem that needs to be solved? Yeah. Because if you don't know, if you're saying, well, what's happened with these children?
But Sheikh, then the proper questioning only comes from awareness then.
Yes, it comes
from awareness is questioning. I don't want to go into philosophy, but I guess awareness itself is questioning.
Yeah. No, it is. And this is why sometimes the point about questioning your own biases, where do your biases come from, and the influence of the environment. And I think this is also where it comes from, I think really importantly and fundamentally is it comes from how we're taught about these things within our own Islamic tradition. So our own madrasas, our own scholars, how are they teaching this? Because to be quite frank, I didn't come up with this myself, how, being aware of certain knowledges and ideas. I was taught this, yeah? So I had to go sit in halaqah, study certain, books and understandings, whether it's to do with thinking process, whether it's to do with belief and rationality, all these types of things. I had to go through that in order to develop a mindset, as best as possible. And then, inshallah, then being able to develop it further, inshallah, with more reading and information. So I'm saying is that this can't just be left to parents, or it can't just be left to children to work out for themselves. Yeah, this has to be something that it needs to be instituted within our own, masajid and madrasas, and therefore help support the parents, which can help support the children, which can develop that type of critical thinking. So as an example, we helped develop within our local mosques in where I live in the north of England, a program about how to address the issue of LGBTQI, with children from about 13, 14 onwards, because they get questioned about these issues. So we said, okay, let's do maybe a group exercise, get them together, give them a scenario. The teacher says that sometimes God makes a mistake and results in a man being born in a woman's body. Discuss. What would you say to that? What was your arguments for that? So write them down. What are the arguments that would support that? Write them down. And then as the teacher, he's able to then provide the correct Islamic position, which is a rational position, and which is built upon the Islamic text as well, in order to identify that. So you're creating them the way to understand and being aware of these types of discussions, because that's the reality. This happened, that particular question which was raised about sometime in a,
I mean, that would be
in a
kufr.
school.
That would be kufr.
Yeah.
Period.
That took place in the UK. That question took place in the UK in an Islamic school.
Oh, wow.
In an Islamic school, Muslim school.
Yeah, I can see
So school run by Muslims, supposedly trying to, and they brought in some external speaker, and the external speaker said that point. Yeah. All the teacher, female teachers all wear hijab, the students are segregated, all that type of thing. And yet this is what an external person came, and the teachers didn't even challenge it. And you're right, it would be kufr. Yeah. But this is the problem. This is the issue, is that, we live in an environment where these questions are being pushed upon Muslim children, being targeted upon Muslim children. I don't know how bad it is in America, but
it's bad
in the UK. So in the UK
It's
we
bad.
have state-run schools where they're about 90% Muslim. Yeah, many schools like this in the inner cities, 90% Muslim children, and it's a state-run school. Yeah, and so they look at those types of schools and try to push this agenda further. So irrespective of whether we think they're age-related or ready or whatever, or these types of discussions, sensitive discussions, we have to talk about them now, because they're being taught it. So you're going to have to arm them with the correct ideas and the ability to critically think about these things. Because to be quite frank, we're not scared of critical thinkers. Muslims and Islam is not scared of critical thinking. The whole point about critical thinking is being aware of your limits of thought and being able to justify your belief in the correct and best possible manner, by that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, our minds. So that is not something we're scared of. The issue is that people talk about critical thinking, most often are not critical thinkers, and they're not even aware of the assumptions and biases that they have. So we want to create critical thinkers, and we want to build that, and we want them to be armed with the correct ideas and the correct mentality to be able to challenge and oppose that, or at the very least, even if they're not going to challenge it in school, because obviously you've got this problem where the teachers might cause issues for the students, but at least they're not going to be influenced by it. And that's the key thing. So I think it has to be through our institutions, it has to be through various programs.
And then the second part about the elite.
So
you have 10 minutes. I know, just 10 minutes. Take 5 minutes, because I have the last question. 5 minutes, please.
It won't take you 5 minutes. I think what it is, when you go through studying, what you find is that obviously schooling age, you find that teachers are just there to try to tick box exercise. Follow the curricula. Have they done?
No, I understand that these things are done, but in the elite universities, do you think this is the case? Or do they know that, look, critical thinkers need to be produced, because we're going to have to run this society properly, or at least manage?
So I think what it is, I don't think there's necessarily a distinction between elite and non-elite. What I think is the distinction on what level you're doing your study. So if you're doing your study at university level and you're doing an undergraduate degree, you're just going to be taught generally. Then you go to a master's, you're doing more research, and then you do a PhD. Then you become somebody who's actually asking the question, trying to find a particular novel answer to a particular problem. Some area of research that may not have been done before. So you develop that. Now the issue is that when it comes to any level of study, the institutions themselves are grounded within the ideology that they live in, they inhabit. So if you live in a secular liberal society, you're going to have institutions reflect that on whatever level. If we live in a communist society, the institutions are all going to be communist. And so what happens is that in these societies, these institutions, there are going to be allowance of an area of critical thinking, but there are barriers that they won't allow. So I know brothers who have tried to do PhDs because they know that they're able to gain credibility within academia and have influence potentially upon other Muslims and non-Muslims through that academic process. They've been barred from it because of their political and ideological views. Because of their Islamic views.
I had a brother here at the University of Chicago. They didn't accept him in economics, literally because of the ideas that he was presenting, that his PhD would be on.
And so therefore, whether you're a top university like Harvard or MIT or Oxford or Cambridge in the UK, or whether it's to do with an ordinary university, they will allow within this limit, this area, because they know that it's for somebody to be granted a PhD, a postdoctorate, a professorship. If he's given that and he's outside of the liberal framework, you're creating an influential who may challenge the very ideas that these institutions are meant to protect. Yeah. So it becomes like a self-filtering process, and it's not necessarily like some, conspiracy theory where there's somebody at the top saying yes, we'll have him study this, and no, it's because the people at the top all believe in the ideology. They're self-selecting those people who are going to reflect that ideology in itself and those values. So within the ideological, you're going to have people who are intellectual, who are critical thinkers, but it's within that boundary. Yeah.
And the last question, Sheikh, can you do me a favor? So we went through this. So we said when we talked about the process. So we have obviously you have the reality, you have senses, you have distinguishing mind, you have previous information. What was the fifth one? You said you were talking questioning your biases.
Yeah. So for example, so I mentioned 5 points. So I said one is to know the process. So the process is a rational process. So we need to have reality and we need to have previous information. And our judgment is only going to be as good as the reality we've got, and also the previous information. Got more reality that we're looking at, and the more of the previous information, the better our judgment. The second thing was to do with, we need to be able to identify what the problem is that we're trying to solve, or what the question we're trying to answer, because it's not all of reality we're trying to study. There may be a specific issue that we're trying to study, so we need to identify the question. The third one was the knowledge, the data set. Yeah, so what information do I need to go? Where do I need to read? What information and data do I need to get from the reality? The fourth one was to be able to be aware of our assumptions and biases. Yeah.
Awareness
and the fifth one
of our biases.
Yeah. And the fifth one is to study and understand people oppose our position. Yeah. Whatever that position is. Yeah. So let's say, for example, if let's say you're doing research in cancer research and you're saying this medicine works. Well, are there research that says it doesn't work? Let me look at those research. Yeah, it's just the normal process. So if you can what we call steelman, if you can strengthen the opponent's position and still reject it, it means that the reason why you're rejecting it is because of a strong foundation in your own position in that situation. Yeah.
Subhanallah. All right, Sheikh, we will end it here because we have 5 minutes. So, Jazakallah khair again, Brother Sharif, for your time. We're going to have to bring you back again. I wish we could continue, but I know you are, mashallah, you are wanted. Alhamdulillah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect, preserve you, Shaykhi. And really, these discussions do help you. And the reason I'm saying that, just so you understand that you need to continue doing this. And these discussions, because, somebody had called me yesterday and regarding the children are going away and they're questioning Allah and things like this. I don't know if you remember, we had the last discussion that we had. That is the discussion that pulled a lot of them back. They were actually at least starting to think, because of the last discussion that you and I had regarding a lot of things that we were discussing. And she actually put that and sent that to me saying, can we discuss this more? Because our children need it. So subhanallah, you are playing a critical role in protecting the aqidah of our children and the minds of our children, really, to be honest, because these are the kind of discussions that actually matter, because they are not getting in schools, they're not getting in the universities, they're not getting in the masajid, they're not getting in with the ulama, and unfortunately, these are the only discussions that, unless they are part of some type of a real discussion in halaqat, that's the only place. But if not, thinking is not taking place. Forget about critical thinking in general. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect, preserve you, Shaykhi, and may Allah Azza wa Jal continue to use you for His sake, and raise your status both in dunya and the akhirah. Ameen. Allahumma ameen. Jazakallah khair, Shaykh.
Take care. Jazakallah khair.
Ameen wa yak, akhi fillah. And for the rest of you brothers and sisters, it is important that we have these type of discussions. We need to raise the level of discussion in the households, in the masajid, wherever it is that people gather to think about things. We need to stop wasting our time and our resources in just food and parties and festivals and all of this nonsense that is being produced out there to do nothing but to waste time and resources of the people. We don't have that time. We're literally losing our children to kufr and ideas of kufr because we are not giving time to learn the deen and the ideas that this deen produced and ruled the world for over 1375 some years. Our children are questioning what they're questioning because of us not ever looking at Islam as the standard through which the rest of mankind needs to think from. And because we have not done that type of critical thinking regarding our own religion and think about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what it is, why it is the way it is, we are losing our children. It's important that you invest the time in learning the deen. Invest your time in learning the deen rather than wasting your time in the kind of nonsense that we waste our time in. So again, take yourself accountable before you're taken accountable. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
لا لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر لا 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 لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر صبح بدا نور ظهر نجم وشمس وقمر ألقى على الدنيا الدرر هذا عمر هذا عمر كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر هذا عمر هذا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن